Thanks for tuning in to the Christ Community Church message today. You're about to hear a message from the series Rebuild. God specializes in building broken things, and Rebuild takes a look at the life of Nehemiah and the blueprint he laid out for fixing broken things in our own lives. Now, if this ministry has blessed you in any way, we'd love to hear about it. You can email us at online@cccomaha.org. Also, if you'd like to give financially, go online to my.cccomaha.org where you can make a donation. Thank you so much for your prayer and financial support, which helps us in blessing thousands all around the world. And now, the message.
All right, well, to start off our message today, I'd like to do a quick survey, just show of hands here. How many people have ever experienced criticism in your life, okay? Show of hands, how many people? Someone just pointed to the person sitting next to them as I asked that question. That was good. Well, I'll have to count on all of your feedback on this because as a lead pastor, I've never experienced criticism in my whole life, so I'll just bank on you. That's not true. Everybody experiences criticism, right? Especially if you're a person who has a holy discontent that leads to a vision for change in the future, you're going to encounter opposition. You're going to encounter criticism in your life. It's true here. It's true all over the world. In China, there is huge opposition to the gospel. Some places it's in subtle ways where there really is relative freedom to speak about the gospel, but in other places, it could be pretty intense persecution, sometimes jail, sometimes even worse. It's a challenging place to live out your faith. When I was there 2 weeks ago, I was asked to speak at an academic conference about religion and culture, and they wanted me to talk about how religion affects culture. Well, as you guys all know, that I believe that Christianity in its essence is not a religion, it's a relationship with Jesus. So I modified my message to be about Jesus. And in this largely safe and sleepy conference, this was a dangerous message. I made a case for Jesus during my message. Not that, hey, everything's basically the same, so let's just have dialogue and enjoy each other. I made a case that Jesus really is the only way to God, and that he's unique among all of the other religions, starting with the idea that Jesus rose from the dead and the rest of them didn't. And as we talked about this, it became clear in the room that nobody was bored. Nobody was. Everybody awoke from their academic stupor and sat forward. Now, I knew that in this case there would be opposition. I knew that there would. But I also knew that most of them did not speak English well enough to diss me to my face. I ran into one Danish philosopher the next morning who awkwardly encountered me at breakfast, and this is what he said to me in the breakfast line. He said, "Thank you, Pastor." I think he was trying to be as complimentary as he could be, given how disturbed he was by my message. So he says, "Thank you, Pastor, for your advertisement for Jesus." And, you know, he meant it to be an insult, but I was like, this is the best compliment I've had all day. I hope my whole life is an advertisement for Jesus. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, there was a Chinese woman who was a PhD philosopher, cornered me the next morning, and after some small talk, she said to me, "You know, I used to live in Vancouver for a semester, and I went to the chapel there every week at Regent College, and every week I would cry because I was so inspired. You know, I haven't felt that again until just yesterday when you came and spoke." And I was able to turn to her and say, "You know what that was? That was the Spirit of God that was at work in your life." And, oh, by the way, I'd love to introduce you to somebody else who also has the Spirit of God in her life if you want to keep moving forward in your spiritual journey. She's sitting right next to me in the conference. Here, let me introduce you to Miss Choi. And I trust that Miss Choi is going to take her a long way down her spiritual journey. So there's going to be, every time you stick your neck out for the sake of the gospel or for a vision, there's going to be big opposition, there's going to be little opposition, there's going to be some fruit that's born from it. Maybe even some friends might have some odd things that they throw in the mix. Like in China, one night at dinner, Benjamin Lee, of all people, Benjamin, you know, our friend, introduced our team to silkworm larvae for dinner. Silkworm larvae, no kidding. Crunchy on the outside, smooth on the inside. It looks like something Pumbaa would eat, doesn't it? They're Benjamin said, these are good, but the really good ones are in another province. They bring them to the table while they're still wriggling. And then they drop them in the oil right in front of you, and the best ones are still moving as they slide down your throat. Yeah, that's what we said too. And then he said, be careful when you eat them, though, because the silkworm are really good, but you got to make sure that you crack them open first, because there's an intestine inside that's really nasty. So take the intestine. It's like got all the goo in there, so you got to take that out. And then he popped a whole one in his mouth, and he said, but when you get really good, you can just do it like this. Just move it with your tongue and take it. There you go. Say, thanks, Ben. As if China wasn't hard enough, you got to add this into us. All kinds of opposition that you might face. Well, Nehemiah, as we know, is trying to build a wall. And just like you experience opposition for whatever you're trying to do, Nehemiah experienced opposition trying to build the wall of Jerusalem. And here's the story. It's in Nehemiah chapter 4. We encounter these two characters that begin opposing him as he builds the wall. And this is what it says in verse 1. Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 1. When Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews, and in the presence of his associates and the army of Samaria, he said, what are those feeble Jews doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble, burned as they are? And then Tobiah the Ammonite, who was at his side, said, what they're building? Even if a fox climbed upon it, he would break down their walls of stones. You know what these guys were? These were the critics. These were the sideline quarterbacks who were criticizing the work, the players that were in the team. These guys had an agenda to stop the work. These guys were haughty and proud. These guys were completely orgulous. And of course, when I say a word like that, that has to become the big word of the week. Everybody say orgulous. Orgulous means proud or haughty. And I learned this word this week from my 10-year-old daughter, Haven, who got it from the Quizlet program, for those of you who are trying to build your vocabulary. But you know who Sanballat reminded me of all the characters that I've experienced in my life? You know who Sanballat reminded me of? Now, this is going to date me. I know this is a little bit weird right here. But Sanballat reminded me of Jabba the Hutt. Jabba the Hutt. Ooh, what are these feeble Jews doing, Wookiee Jedi? Sanballat is the governor of Samaria, and Jerusalem and Judah are right here. Well, Samaria was just to the north, and that's where Sanballat was. And he had the most to lose with Jerusalem building walls, because he was just a little kind of puppet governor of the Persian Empire. But because the capital of Persia was so far away, he had his little power structure that he had here. If the walls of Jerusalem got built, Sanballat would lose power. And the same thing is true of Tobiah, who lived in this area called Ammon, just to the east of Judah and Jerusalem. So these guys team up together in order to criticize what's happening. Did you notice the taunts that he gave? He questioned their strength. What are these feeble Jews going to do? He questioned their ability. Will they restore their wall? He questioned their religion. Will they offer sacrifices? He questions their speed. Can they finish in a day? He questions the possibility of a good outcome anyway. Can they bring these burned rubble pieces of stone back to life? And everybody who's a good critic, everybody who's successful at criticism has a henchman, don't they? And Tobiah is the henchman of Sanballat. And of course, Tobiah chimes in. And Tobiah, he reminds me of somebody as well. You remember how Jabba had that little guy who sat on him? Salacious B. Crumb. You remember this guy? This is what Tobiah reminds me of. You know, when they're building, even a fox climbing on it wouldn't break down their wall of stone. His aren't quite as good as Sanballat's. But he joins in and adds momentum to the criticism that's going on there. Well, and the truth is, these two guys have a point. They have a point. The Jews have been feeble for 140 years while their wall's been broken down. They are not professional wall builders. The job is huge. The stones are broken and burned. The walls are in really bad shape. And this is something that happens with critics. Every single one of us, when we have a holy discontent that leads to a vision, we'll have critics, and you know what? Usually what the critics say have some grain of truth to them. That's why they have so much power. That's why they can destroy vision and lead to discouragement. One of the things that's just true, is that life is full of pain and brokenness. And the broken wall of Jerusalem, while being a real physical place, is also an important symbol. It's a symbol of the brokenness that we experience in our city. It's a symbol of the brokenness that we experience in our own personal lives. My guess is that if I sat down with each person who's here today, each person who's joining us online, we could hear stories of broken walls. I mean, you all know my story well enough to know that I've been through significant pain. 2 children who were conceived but never born, freaky accidents that have happened to friends and loved ones and left them hospitalized or dead and leave you asking why. Watched my parents get divorced and lived in the fallout of that for years. I've seen abuse strike my extended family and people that I love here at the church. You know, the walls are broken. The walls are broken. And in a culture where 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men are sexually abused by the time they turn 20, in a culture where 1 in 4 people suffer from mental illness or depression, in a culture where divorce is common, debt is high, and fear runs rampant, I'll bet you could say you know of some broken walls around you as well. I want you to know now, at the end of the message, in all of our different venues, I'm going to be inviting people to come forward for prayer. Because God has the power to mend broken walls. And if you're somebody who says, you know what, I know about something that's broken in my life, in my world, in my city, I'd love to have prayer for that. Well, you just get your hearts ready, and we'll be praying for you at the end of the service. Now, just like you, Nehemiah faced broken walls. And just like you, Nehemiah had his critics. The words for you may be different than the words that Nehemiah faced. I mean, you tackle your vision, and people say, that's a waste of time, or who are you to try and change that? Or do you think you're better than us? Or it's been that way forever. What kind of a difference will you be able to make? You want to change your life, you want to rebuild, you want to change the city, but the critics just keep coming around with discouragement. It's one of the enemy's most powerful tools, discouragement is. It's one of the great killers of vision. And when discouragement doesn't work, enemies will resort to threats. That's what happened in Nehemiah's day. Tobiah comes out and Sanballat with threats after discouragement doesn't work. But when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, and the Ammonites, and the men of Ashdod heard that the repairs to Jerusalem's walls had gone ahead and that the gaps were being closed, they were very angry. They all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir up trouble against it. So the stakes go up. Now the people of Israel aren't just being criticized, they're being threatened. An attack is coming. And if you look at the 4 groups that are mentioned, it's Sanballat and the Samaritans in the north, the Ammonites in the east, the Ashdodites in the west, and the Arabs in the south. The 4 key groups that are mentioned are surrounding Jerusalem. And this is going to be a big deal. Listen to what the people of Jerusalem said in verse 10. Meanwhile, the people in Judah said, the strength of the laborers is giving out. And there's so much rubble, we can't rebuild the wall. Also, our enemies said, before they know it or see us, we'll be right there among them, and we'll kill them and put an end to their work. Then the Jews who lived near them came and told us 10 times over, wherever you turn, they will attack us. Well, the people are starting to believe the threats that are coming towards them. They're tired. They're asking the question, can this wall even be rebuilt anyway? They're experiencing a high rubble factor, and now they're afraid for their lives on top of all of that. Rumors are flying all over the region. At least 10 times they were threatened. And in an era where there was no CNN or ABC or NBC to deliver the news, rumors were the only way that they got news. And now 10 times they're hearing the same things and they're believing it to be true. Even the people who have the most to gain from building the wall are starting to be discouraged. And who would blame them? Who would blame them if they give up on their vision? I mean, if you're pursuing a vision of any magnitude, you've been criticized. Anytime you move forward with a vision, you experience criticism. Perhaps your vision will remind somebody of something that they're not. Maybe it reminds them of something that they should be and could be, but instead of aspiring to more, they criticize. I think this is one reason why new believers experience so much pain and criticism from their non-Christian family and friends immediately following their conversion. The new believer catches a vision of what life could be and should be, and it reflects poorly on the people around them who are content with the way things are. So instead of aspiring to that new level, they discourage the person to drag them down to where they are. The same is true for someone who wants to better themselves educationally or financially. People around you see what they should be doing, and instead of taking the risk along with you, they criticize you for it. Or maybe your vision is making the people around you feel uncomfortable, like they're not in control the way that they once were. This is why unbelieving spouses oftentimes criticize their believing partners. God now has control that they used to have. Sometimes even people who are walking away from addictions get criticism from the ones who love them the most. And sometimes they give up because of that criticism. You know, it's easy to give up on the vision when you face criticism or when you face threats. Stephanie has a vision of marrying a godly man. She passes on many suitors in order to wait for a guy who loves Jesus and treats her right. Her friends let her know that there really just aren't guys like that anymore. And she begins to believe them and settles for a guy who just doesn't believe. Josh wants his wayward daughter to come back to faith and a lifestyle that matches it. Some buddies from work chide him. You know, kids are like that these days. Times have changed, and Josh's vision dies. Linda and Greg have a load of bad debt that they accumulated from bad choices they made early in their marriage. And they take on a new vision to be debt-free. When Linda shares it with her girlfriends, they say, "Come on, Linda, everybody's got debt. Besides, it'll take you years to climb out of it, years of sacrifice." And so, discouraged, she abandons the plan. John has a vision for a new business, and he sees the massive possibilities for its future. But his colleagues ask him a million micromanaging questions about capital and talent. And after the rejection of a single bank, John gives up on the dream. Daniel has a vision for his campus. He imagines reaching the guys on his dorm floor with a Bible study designed just for them. But when nobody shows up the first week, Daniel's roommate says, "Hey, it's okay. Nobody's interested in Jesus anymore. Come on, let's grab a beer." So Daniel grabs his coat, leaves the room, and the vision dies. You know, criticism can devastate a vision. But when you encounter experience, what do you do in order to not let the vision die? Well, I think Nehemiah does three great things to respond to the vision in this passage, to respond to criticism in this passage, and accomplish the vision. First thing he does is pray. Somebody say pray. Second thing he does is he remembers the source of the vision. Somebody say remember. Third thing he does is he revises the plan. Somebody say revise. So back to the top, first thing he does is he prays. You can read about this in verse 4. Nehemiah says this, "Hear us, O God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in a land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of the builders." Now, I'm just guessing that Nehemiah did not have the spiritual gift of mercy, based on this prayer. My guess is that you have not heard many people in your journey groups praying like this. If you had, you might recommend counseling for them or warn the preschool director of the church not to let him volunteer. But Nehemiah does a great thing here. What Nehemiah does by praying this kind of diss your enemies prayer, which is called an imprecatory prayer, essentially he's saying, God, it's your job to take revenge on these guys for opposing your vision. He doesn't try and take control of something that he has no power over. He can't do anything about these guys or their threats or their criticism. He's got one mission in mind. It's to build the wall. So he says, God, you take care of these guys. That's your job. And in doing so, it's the exact right thing to do. God's not obligated to obey Nehemiah, but now it's off of Nehemiah's shoulders. It's in God's camp, and he doesn't have to take care of it anymore. Your prayer does amazing things because God's the only one with the power to do anything about this anyway. So you may as well bring it to God and let him take control of it. It's also amazing what happens in your mind when you put your critics in the perspective of the power of God. Because when you focus on the critics, you focus on them or the size of their arguments. But in prayer, you're focusing on the size of your God. And your critics look awfully small in perspective of the size of your God. So take it to prayer and then advance the vision. That's what Nehemiah did. Verse 6 says, so we built the wall till all of it reached half its height, for the people worked with all their heart. So by Nehemiah chapter 4, the wall is already 15 feet high and 16 feet wide. This is a pretty darn big wall that they've got going at this point. It's not full protection, but they see progress that's happening along the way, and progress will encourage the hearts of the people. Not only did Nehemiah pray, though, Nehemiah also remembered the source of his vision. If you go on to verse 14, it says this, after I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. See, Nehemiah remembered the source of his vision. God, this was your idea in the first place, so you're going to have to make it real. And then he remembered back to the supernatural intervention of God in his life when he was in front of Artaxerxes, the most powerful man in the entire world at the day. And he remembered back to the holy discontent God had put deep inside of him. He remembered the answers to the prayers that he prayed while he was in Susa and the answers of God in his life. And he told the people, you guys do the same thing. Remember the Lord. Remember his goodness. Remember his size and his strength and his power. And while you're at it, remember who you're fighting for. Your wives and your kids. Keep your eyes on the vision. Now, interestingly, Nehemiah never talked about the validity of the criticism. Because maybe the job was impossible. I mean, maybe he didn't have the right tools or the right team. Maybe he did just waste his 1,000-mile journey. Did you notice that Nehemiah never focused on these things, though? He focused on the power of God. Because as long as you evaluate criticism in the light of your potential, you'll be tempted to give up. But when you evaluate criticism in the light of God's potential, the potential is unlimited. You know, here at Christ Community Church, there are times that we come face to face with visions that are way bigger than is humanly possible to face. I mean, how do you change the trajectory of health care for women in Mali, West Africa? How do you reach Omaha and the Omaha Metro with the good news of Jesus? How do you open up doors for the gospel in China? How do you simultaneously make disciples, put together marriages, raise godly kids, attack poverty, eliminate human trafficking, grow a church, plant other churches, and launch sites all at the same time? You look at these things, you go, these things are impossible. But they're possible by the power of God. And I'll tell you what, there are times where I'll look at these things and wonder, God, can this even be done? Can it even be done? And it's oftentimes that I wander back into my office and I remember my calling here. Because I wasn't looking for this job. I was really content where I was. I never thought of myself as a lead pastor. This job came looking for me. And the truth is, the church wasn't really looking for me. They were looking for somebody qualified. But God brought me into the sights of the church and the church into the sights of me. And in the unlikely ways that God works together, He showed both of us that this is just the right thing. And whenever I have doubts, I go back to the moment of my calling and I say, God, you set this up. You make good on it. I'm just obeying you. And that's what Nehemiah is saying. God, you set this up. I'm remembering your vision, your purpose in my life, the direction that you've called me to. So you're going to have to make it work. Nehemiah was participating in the vision because God had put it in his heart to participate in the vision. And you have to remember that when you face the critics. So Nehemiah prayed, Nehemiah remembered, and then Nehemiah revised the plan. Nehemiah revised the plan. He does this. The summary is in verse 9. I love this verse, verse 9. But we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet this threat. Now, I know this is weird, but this is actually one of my most favorite verses in the entirety of the Bible. We prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet this threat. And since it's such a happy verse for me, let's all read it out loud together. You ready? Here we go. But we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet this threat. You know, one of the reasons that I love this verse is it illustrates a very important principle of living the Christian life. Nehemiah prayed and he posted. Nehemiah came in utter dependence on God and said, God, this whole deal is up to you, and I'm banking on you to make good on it. He was utterly dependent on God. And at the same time, he was strategic in deciding, so what are we going to do next? He prayed and he acted. And I think there are some people who make the mistake in life of saying, I'm so super spiritual that all I'm going to do is pray about this issue and then just be apathetic about it from this point forward. This is not a formula for optimal change in the world, because in prayer, God births actions that He wants us to do. People also make the mistake of saying, I'm only going to be strategic in making decisions about life and sorting through issues and figuring things out and acting on my own, but I'm leaving God in the back seat of the car. Both of these are equal mistakes, and the Christian life is lived in a place where you say, I prayed to my God and I posted a guard. I did both of those things together. Now, notice that there's a new piece in the strategy here, and that is posting a guard. Up to this point, Nehemiah was just building the wall. 100% of the effort is going towards the wall. But because there's a threat, Nehemiah needs to revise his plans. Now, this action, this posting a guard, is not the demonstration of a lack of faith on Nehemiah's part. Action isn't based on a lack of faith. Action is actually faith that's moving forward. God says, trust me in this, and you continue to move forward in doing what God told you to do. Nehemiah did his part and trusted God for the rest. This is what it says. From that day on, half of my men did the work, while the other half were equipped with spears, shields, bows, and armor. The officers posted themselves behind all the people of Judah who were building the wall. Those who carried materials did their work with one hand and held a weapon in the other. And each of the builders wore his sword at his side as he worked. But the man who sounded the trumpet stayed with me. You got to get this picture of the people. The revised plan is not that you're spending all of your time building with a trowel in your hand, but it's a trowel in one hand and a sword in the other hand. There's a revision in the plan that Nehemiah makes. Why? Because he's got to address new issues as they come up. I want to let you know that the revision of a plan is a normal part of leadership. Sometimes people think if you have to create revisions to the strategy, then the vision must have not been right in the first place. Friends, I'm telling you, do not confuse your plans with God's vision. Every single time that I've been in leadership and God's given a vision that He wants to accomplish, every single time we did not get the plans right in the first place. There had to be a revision. In this case, it's not just trowel people, it's trowel and sword. And they split up the workforce, and people carried swords with them. Some people carried trowels with them. But everybody was in the role of doing both of these jobs. And what happened was that Nehemiah revised, and he succeeded. Here's what it says. Sanballat must have been counting on a surprise attack, and as soon as the people of Jerusalem weren't surprised anymore, he gave up on his plans. It says, when our enemies heard that we were aware of their plot and that God had frustrated it, we all returned to the wall, each one to his own work. Sanballat and Tobiah never attacked. Why? Because Nehemiah prayed to his God, and he posted a guard. It's important to do this. Nehemiah depended on the power of community to accomplish the goals that God led him to in prayer. Sometimes you need the power of community to overcome opposition. And I want to say something to the men for a moment here. You guys need community too. If you're not in community with other men, there will come a time in your life where you need this spiritual foundation, this set of relationships, because you will experience opposition in your wall building. And on December 7th, you can experience that in the Stepping Up event for men from all of our campuses. You can sign up in the lobby today. You can sign up online today. It'll be the very thing that will help you to pray and get into community and live your life on purpose. So gather together with other men around round tables at the Old Mill campus to step up, take control, and live your life with courage. See, if God has given you a holy discontent, if He's given you vision for the future, don't let the critics steal it from you. Begin with prayer. Remember God, and revise the plan. God can do amazing things with His unlimited potential in this arena. You know, I want to go back for a moment as we close today to our original verse that I said is my favorite. Nehemiah prayed to his God, and he posted a guard. When you have a vision or a pain or a need in your life, it's great to get some help on the prayer side of things. We all need to begin with the idea of prayer. And at Christ Community Church, we love to pray over things. We love to have the people of God praying to the God of the universe because our God is a miracle-working God. Amen? God isn't obligated to do a miracle, but you'll never see a miracle if you don't ask God to do the miracle. Maybe you're here today and you've got a vision for change in your life. Maybe you're here today and you want to live for God, but it's hard. You need to do some relational repair. You want to get out of debt. You want to reach your dorm floor. You want to live a life of purity, but it's hard, and you want some supernatural power for your life. We got elders and pastors and prayer warriors who would love to pray with you and invite God's power into your life, and you'll get to come to the front and pray together. In fact, I'm going to ask all of you to stand up now in all of our different venues, in Bellevue and Access, here in the worship center. Let's stand up together. And I want to invite you in just a minute to come down to the front to receive prayer. I mean, maybe this week has been a rough one from you. Maybe you feel like you need that miracle from God for medical issues. We want to pray with you. Maybe you've got some legal problems that are happening in your life, and we want to pray with you over that as well. Maybe you're going through a divorce or some relational turmoil, and you go, I need prayer for that. We're here to pray with you. We're here to pray with you every week, but this week in particular, we're inviting people to come down to the front to take a step of faith and receive prayer. We're going to pray and post a guard, and we're going to start with the praying part right here, right now, today. And when we invite people, if you're in Access, just come down from the back. You know, walk around the aisles if you have to, get in there and meet people up front. If you're in the worship center and you're in the balcony, go around to the edges, or you can sneak out the back and then come down. But don't let these little things get in the way of you praying. So prayer team, I'm going to invite you to come to the front right now. If you're an elder, if you're a pastor, if you're someone who's been set up as a prayer warrior to come to the front, right now you guys can emerge to the front. And if you're someone who says, you know what, I know I need prayer like right now, just start moving to the front. Come on down. I'm hoping we're going to have a lot of people who are down here for prayer, so be bold and start moving at this point. Don't be shy. We all need prayer for our broken walls and our broken visions. Bring it on and let's pray together. You know, perhaps you need prayer because you've got a wayward kid and you want prayer for that relationship. Or maybe you've got a God-sized vision and you need God-sized power. Maybe you need to start a relationship with God and you need some help on figuring out how to do that. We'll pray with you for that too. We are here for you. So come on forward for prayer. Come on down right now. I'm going to hand things off in each of our different venues, but wherever you are, start moving to the front and we'll be praying for you. Come on down.